Today on CityCast DC, DC's violence interruption program has become one of the most controversial subjects in local politics. On one side, there are people who admire the idea of having former victims and perpetrators of violence reach out to young people in the name of stopping feuds. On the other, there's mounting evidence that a lot of the programs that have gotten city tax dollars are poorly run and problematic. One of those programs finds itself front and center in the upcoming corruption trial of a DC council member. Gathright and Megan Flynn from the Washington Post recently published a deep dive investigation into that group. They're here to explain. Today is Monday, February 23rd. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC is talking about. Jenny and Megan, welcome back.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys did this really deep investigation into the violence interruption program, this one organization, the financial shenanigans there. It seems like this subject, violence interrupters and their quality or lack of quality, has been like big in the news in DC for a while. It's at the center of some of the charges against DC Councilmember Trayon White. And then after you guys published, there was another story about a violence interrupter charged with homicide. Tell me about your investigation and what it found.
I can start. So we started looking into life deeds after the arrest of Trayon White, the DC council member representing Ward 8, because we identified that the contractor who has been accused of bribing the council member, and became a confidential informant for the FBI as part of the case, was the founder, executive director of Life Deeds, which received millions in city contracts for violence interruption.
What is Life Deeds, just for people who don't know?
Life Deeds is a nonprofit, that worked largely in DC for many years, receiving millions in DC government contracts for not only violence intervention work in some of the district's most high crime neighborhoods, but also with the Child and Family Services Agency for group homes for kids in their system, and then also with the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services for mentoring of justice-involved youth in the city. So they really touched a lot of different city issues. They also previously had a contract running homeless shelters for families. They have done a lot of work for the city over the years between 2009 and the end of 2025.
What does justice-involved youth mean?
Young people who have been arrested or somehow who have been involved in the juvenile justice system.
All right. So Life Deeds, who runs the firm?
So Life Deeds was run by Aliu Kamara, who really emerged in around August of 2024 when we reported he was the confidential informant in the Trayon White bribery arrest. He, in Trayon White's indictment, Aliu Kamara alleges that he'd previously given a bribe to Trayon White in the form of $20,000 while one of Life Deeds' contracts was in dispute after they were terminating some of those contracts for other issues that DC government had found with Life Deeds' work, including falsifying background checks. Life Deeds went on to continue getting government work after those terminations. And, there's a couple, there was also a one's official who was, she pleaded guilty to bribery that also involved Aliu Kamara. So he, then became an informant, and he also was charged with bribing a CFSA employee to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. The Child and Family Services Agency, so essentially our child welfare system here in the district. And so he, had to step down as executive director from Life Deeds, and that really launched Life Deeds into the spotlight as far as these are, at this point, multiple bribery allegations that are connected to multiple, DC government employees or officials. And, at the center of this is Aliu Kamara, whether as an informant or prior to being an informant.
Let me back up for a second. So we have this nonprofit called Life Deeds. Does it have any other sources of contracts? Does it get contracts from other governments or other organizations? Or is it just DC?
On its website, Life Deeds discussed working in Maryland, but I would say the nonprofit is most known for its extensive work in DC, receiving DC government grants and contracts.
How much are we talking about?
Between 2012 and 2024, DC government awarded Life Deeds at least $20 million in contracts and grants from multiple agencies. And again, this is serving homeless people. This is serving youth who have been arrested. This is serving young people in the child welfare system. And it's serving people who are closest to the violence on DC streets.
So this firm that is at the center of a bunch of bribery allegations, at the center of a very high-profile political trial that's about to happen, has received $20 million in our money, taxpayers. And that money is supposed to go to a bunch of essential and important services. What did you guys find in your investigation in terms of where it did actually go? Because there was some jaw-dropping stuff in my reading of it.
Sure. So the grants that we're talking about, they're about $3.6 million in a 15-month period that we examined. Of that, we identified about $400,000, more than $400,000, that went back to Life Deeds employees or their family members in the form of, we're going to hire a vendor to put on a pool party. And it turns out that all the vendors at the pool party are connected to Life Deeds in some way. Or we're going to, take youth to New Jersey to go-karting, and the transportation company is a Life Deeds employee. So we really examined all of the business licenses, if those were available. In many cases, there actually were no business licenses. We examined what we could through public records to piece together that a lot of the money is recirculated, within Life Deeds. That's not to say, of course, there were frontline violence interrupters doing the work every day. There's mixed reviews about the quality of the work, kind of can vary neighborhood by neighborhood, violence interrupter by violence interrupter. And so certainly a lot of the money was going to the intended purpose, but then you have this whole other chunk of it that even the city has acknowledged truly undermines the violence intervention mission when it's being used in ways that, for example, to throw a pool party where we found clearly there was, it was alcohol was involved. It looks like a bash. It doesn't look like a party that's geared toward, community engagement or the violence interruption mission.
How much did that pool party cost?
That I want to say was about $8,000.
You guys also reported that I believe the founder of Life Deeds had been billing district taxpayers for his residence, and in fact, billing two agencies.
That's right. So there's a building that Aliu Kamara owned in Southeast DC that he used, he said he was using for two different government contracts. So both as office space under one grant with one government agency, and then also as a group home for youth in the child welfare system. He owned the property and paid a monthly mortgage. He also billed the DC government for monthly rent on that property, but he was billing two agencies at the same time, ultimately getting reimbursed by the DC government an amount of money that exceeded his monthly mortgage by 5 times.
So his monthly mortgage was like $2,000 and he was billing like $10,000 a month?
Exactly. He was billing two different agencies $5,000 a month each for that property.
And what was he actually using it for, as far as you know?
We have no reason to suspect it was not used for a group home.
Okay.
As well as office space.
What did he say when you reached out to him about your findings?
He declined to comment. I will also note that, he is at the center of an ongoing legal maelstrom, and there is litigation. Trayon White's trial has not happened yet. It's now been rescheduled for much later this year. And so there are a lot of ongoing legal matters at play. But yes, we did reach out to him and we reached out to his lawyer, and both declined to comment for our story.
Catch world-class arts in DC this spring for free. The Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University presents the Peabody Performance Series, a full season of free concerts at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center, located at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. The Peabody Performance Series brings the artistry and innovation of one of the nation's leading conservatories to the heart of DC with concerts and programs spanning jazz, classical music, and dance. Take a midday break with the Peabody Graduate Jazz Ensemble on February 27th. On March 24th, experience the Dance Showcase featuring contemporary choreography by Peabody faculty and alumni. On April 10th, the first of the Slang Lecture Series examines spirituals as the cultural bedrock of the American sound, led by distinguished visiting faculty artist Darren Atwater. Hear the Baltimore Jazz Collective's original compositions, arrangements, and swinging improvisations on April 17th. On May 1st, pianist Stephen Spooner presents Aspects of Liszt. And on May 8th, the season concludes with a performance by the Peabody Jazz Ensemble. While all events are free, tickets are required for entry. Learn more and get your tickets at washingtondc.jhu.edu. Life can change in an instant, and that can feel especially true in the winter months. One moment everything feels normal, and the next, someone else's mistake turns your world upside down. That's when you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers, they dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something we love. They're a longtime supporter of CityCast, because just like us, they care about this community and the people who call it home. So if you or someone you care about has been hurt, don't wait. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected, so that you can focus on what matters most. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. All right, assuming that you guys didn't make terrible, inexplicable misunderstandings about that billing and the other stuff. Look, cities give a lot of money in contracts, and some percentage of human beings are, either scoundrels or nincompoops and don't use the money as they're supposed to. And cities are supposed to have, or any government is supposed to have, sort of guardrails to make sure that the money is being spent the way it's intended. What happened here? How did the DC government let this happen?
Yes, well, this was certainly a breakdown in oversight. There's a few things, some of which have since changed, but in this case, in 2024, the city outsourced the day-to-day monitoring and oversight of these violence intervention grantees to a third party called Progressive Life Center. So they were in charge of vetting expenses and giving a green light on expenses at the front door. The city later found that they seemed to greenlight inappropriate expenses.
Did they have any Life Deeds relatives on them? We
reached out to Progressive Life Center. We looked at them. Everything that we found on, their involvement is in this story. That's not something that wasn't part of our findings. But, that was a big part of the issue. Then you have the expenses going to the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. We did find there was a compliance employee who would be periodically raising concerns. We found this via FOIA emails. And it's just not clear that either they weren't fully followed up on, or just not clear what happened when that employee would raise concerns. And this behavior just seemed to continue unabated for the duration of this grant period. And we only examined, one grant period. They've had contracts dating back several years before that. And so ultimately, what you have is a third party that's kind of doing the front door checking. And then at the back end, the DC government is supposed to kind of be very, meticulously reviewing that work. And it wasn't evident that was happening.
Yeah, and just to add, Life Deeds, they had to submit event proposals, and then they had to submit receipts to request reimbursement from the DC government. And we can see in every single one of these submissions that Progressive Life Center was signing off on the spending. We only found one case where they did not. That was, a request for reimbursement for taking 8 young people to an NFL game in Philadelphia. That was the only expense that we saw in the records that we examined over the 15 months that we received via public records request, where a request was denied.
Let me ask you about your reporting a little bit, because, it seems like Life Deeds and its founder are front and center in the Trayon White situation. They're throwing pool parties. They're living large. Was this a thing a lot of people knew about? Was it sort of a hiding in plain sight until that indictment?
That's a good question, Mike. I mean, there were definitely like this kind of chatter or, accusations within certain communities that didn't trust the VI program or whoever was serving them. And it did sort of demand a deeper look at why did people feel that way. Of course, in this case, we looked specifically at life deeds, where we also had, heard specific complaints from members of certain communities. They had major questions about how money, when they see such great investment from the DC government in a program that has really high ideals, this idea that, people who were on the wrong track early in their lives have committed themselves to turning things around and to really making a dent in, gun violence and convincing people to go off on a better track. And so there are a lot of people who support that. But then when you have questions about the spending and you can't seem to get answers to those questions, as, some people we spoke to in Columbia Heights really, really struggled with, that really creates a trust issue. And life deeds, regardless of how some people felt about their work, there were just these lingering questions about where's the money going?
Well, and that's precisely the conundrum with violence interrupters, that they use people with credibility among folks who are possibly on the wrong track because they've been there themselves too. And that gives them a lot of credibility to try to steer people in a different direction. But if that's your backstory, it's not that likely you have like a master's in sociology, much less like a CPA in order to do the books right. I don't know if that describes Kamara, though. Is that his background as well?
I would describe Kamara more in this situation as more of a behind-the-scenes operator running the nonprofit, but not necessarily someone known for being on the ground in communities. I mean, I've covered public safety issues in D.C. For years now, and he is not someone who was highly visible in DC communities. He had connections to DC social circles through Trayon White, and he was definitely around, but he wasn't someone who was frequently at community meetings talking about things happening in neighborhoods. He wasn't someone you would see responding to an incident. He was more of a behind-the-scenes figure, clearly running the finances of this organization and hiring people to do the on-the-ground work.
In his own personal life story, was he a person who was on the wrong track, in trouble with the law, etc.?
Not that we know of, meaning with the caveat that I have not spent time with him.
Of course.
What we know about his biography, we've largely reported, which is that, he was in the Army for a time. He came back. He grew up in Prince George's County, and he had started this nonprofit around 2009.
I raise all that to ask what the reporting process was like. This issue of violence interrupters has become so politicized. Greg Pemberton, the police union head, has called it a sham. He's a very polarizing, sort of Trumpy figure in local DC. I can imagine that's the kind of context where a couple of reporters from the Washington Post carrying notebooks are not necessarily going to be welcomed with open arms. What kind of response did you get when you went around?
I actually would push back against that a bit. Obviously, criticism of the VI program has come from expected corners or people who never trusted it to begin with, But also, there are a lot of people in this city who really believe that violence intervention work, when done well, can make a huge difference in people's lives. They've seen it. They've done this work themselves. And those kinds of people who we spoke with in the course of our reporting, they also welcomed scrutiny on the program, and they welcomed scrutiny on life deeds because they felt like, people who were bad actors in the space were detracting from the real work that they were doing. And I think they welcomed scrutiny to sort of sort through and wade through, where things actually went wrong with the monitoring and oversight. Because again, the reporting to us showed not necessarily failures of the people who are hired, not paid very well, and put in dangerous situations, and in many cases really well-intentioned and wanting to make a difference and working really hard to do so. It really created a distinction between those folks and then the people who were in charge of overseeing the spending at this nonprofit, and then also, approving the expenses within the DC government.
And a lot of the discourse around your guys' revelations, and really people should read the whole story. It's really, really good. And the recent homicide charges against a violence interrupter has been sort of, to shorthand it, violence interruption is no good. It's bad. It's a scam. Is that a thing you see influencing the people who actually decide budgets in DC?
It's a great question. There was a huge debate last year about during the budget process for the violence intervention program, in which Brooke Pinto expressed deep concern about how the office was being run, had this unusual, written assurance from the Bowser administration that they were going to really focus on oversight and building a more robust model for the violence intervention program to follow. We also had this odd situation in which you had two parallel violence intervention programs through the AG's office and through the Bowser administration operating at the same time, sometimes in overlapping territory. Those got shrunk or merged essentially to just be ones, while the AG's program now does not operate anymore, which was an overall shrinkage as well, and just the amount of resources going toward VI. But yeah, I mean, there really are two minds on this, which is this deep distrust, especially when something like this happens where a VI is charged with homicide. That's the nightmare scenario for those who believe in the violence intervention program. And I would echo Jenny that really a lot of the people we spoke with, both those who are quoted in the story and those who are not, were very big believers in this program and just do not want to see it mismanaged or, be in the hands of people who may not have as good as intentions. So there certainly is that tension between when you have something that goes wrong, whether that is a discredit to the program or just requires greater controls and greater management and oversight of a well-intentioned program, which is really what, at the end of the day, the people we spoke to were really pushing for and wanting to see.
We're heading into a DC budget cycle right now, and as you've reported, it's going to be a very, very difficult one. Someone's ox is going to get gored. It's a brutal fiscal climate for the city. Do you get the sense that people are going to be suggesting that violence interruption is one of the things that maybe ought to get cut?
I don't know what's going to happen. I will say that the funding for violence intervention was already scaled back for this year, ahead of this year's budget during that consolidation. And the city, over the past several months has been consulting with a panel of experts on sort of how to change or alter the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement's violence intervention program. So it'll be interesting to see what recommendations come out of that process. I will say that one thing that's been kind of frustrating for experts on gun violence prevention who have testified before the DC Council and studied the city's programs is that non-police violence intervention programs have shown success, measurable success in other cities like Baltimore and Chicago, but not in DC. And I think they're calling for a lot more attention on how to refashion DC's programs so that the city can see those same successes. But it'll be interesting to see how that conversation goes this year, where homicides are down significantly from where they were a couple years ago, and the city is just not facing the same level of crisis with violence. And it'll be interesting just to see how officials approach that conversation and those decisions right now.
I reread your guys' story before we started talking today, and I came away thinking it's sort of a tragedy that so much of the discourse in the wake of it was about, is violence interruption no good or is it good? And not about someone in the city government should be getting in trouble for allowing this ridiculous, unchecked, unverified expenses to go on. As far as you know, in the fallout from your reporting, has anyone gotten in trouble for that? Just on the budget watchdog and tax dollar side?
I mean, the one significant change since this, and this happened before the story was published and in the wake of other investigations and other examinations, is that the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement no longer employs Progressive Life Center to monitor its grantees' spending. And they brought that monitoring in-house. In terms of other significant changes, Megan, feel free to chime in if I'm forgetting something.
Yeah, I mean, for some of the spending that we identified that appeared inappropriate, such as, taking people over 200 miles away to New Jersey, there is now a 100-mile trip radius. If you are just a little bit outside that, you have to get it approved. One of the current grantees we spoke to vouched for, a lot more oversight that was felt in 2025 compared to the previous year after they, got rid of Progressive Life Center. They also talked about having a stronger vetting process. But then, there's something like this happens where then you have a violence interrupter charged with homicide who had been fired from Life Deeds, for picking up an unlawful possession of a firearm, felony offense, served time, and then was rehired as a violence interrupter. So, then you have to question, some of this stuff is subjective and it's challenging. It's a judgment call on whether somebody deserves another chance in a lot of these hiring decisions that are already inherently, it's people who they have a record. It's not like you're doing a criminal background check. Of course they're going to come up with a criminal background check. That's part of the idea is bringing that informed background to the table in trying to convince people to go on a new path.
Are there things that these other cities that Jenny cited where it's been successful do in terms of financial and other forms of watchdogging that DC doesn't do?
I guess the answer, maybe I'm not going to give a satisfying answer here. I feel like there are a lot of different approaches at play in other cities. And I think that the actual... So I spoke with Daniel Webster. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins who studies these things. And he actually said, it is important for these organizations, these nonprofits, to have a somewhat flexible pot of money to spend how they will, because you need to be nimble in the moment. If someone is at imminent risk of being a victim or perpetrator of gun violence, you want to whisk them out of town, you need to be able to do that at a moment's notice and be able to pay for it. And so his calls to the DC government have actually been less about strict fiscal controls and more about monitoring these organizations to make sure they're adhering to an evidence-based model. And a lot of the research shows that it's really about providing people with a real curriculum that gets them pathways to better mental health, to being employable, and wraparound supports that haven't always been so seamless for the DC government to deliver. And that's getting a bit into the weeds.
Before I let you go, what kind of reaction have you guys personally gotten to your reporting?
We were satisfied to see that people, wanted to take a close look at the program and wanted to see a little bit behind the curtain how some of this went wrong. And so we were glad to see that there was interest in that, because we do believe that that is important, and not just in this program, but really in any government program.
I mean, I would imagine if I was doing this violence interruption and I was true blue, I would be so mad at Life Deeds for kind of running down the side.
There are, violence interrupters who are really upset at Life Deeds specifically because it tarnishes. There are good people doing the work, right? Who then feel that they are painted with a broad brush. And that's the challenge. And a lot of this too is just making sure we can be fair about who really is doing this with good intentions, working really, really hard, and others who might be taking advantage.
Megan and Jenny, thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Before we go, thank you to Erica P. and Kat T. for becoming neighbors. Neighbors get ad-free listening, an extra segment in our Friday News Roundup, an extra events newsletter, and more. If you want to be a neighbor too, you can join for $10 a month or $100 a year at membership.citycast.fm. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.